What if we've misunderstood everything? What if the wars in the Bible weren't what we thought? What if it wasn't about people at all? And what if the truth is something they don't want you to know? Welcome to Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, comparative mythology enthusiasts, and last but certainly not least, all of you that desperately cling to your confirmation bias. Welcome to the show. Whether your interest is Atlantis, Zeus, or anything in between, we tackle it all with logic and reason from our quantumly entangled castle, tucked away in the ancient flood-battered Central Pangaean mountain range. We are the one-stop shop for myth, history, and mystery, decoding it all through the lens that the spiritual is the geometric fourth dimension. Be some additional trigger warnings for this episode. The subject matter will be a little more explicit due to talking about subjects of genocide and more. I can't predict exactly where the conversation will go, but if any of those topics are triggering to you, listener discretion is advised. I definitely would say it wouldn't be an episode for little ears. Beyond that, the only other trigger warning for this episode is logical conversation. So if applying the Socratic method on fringe topics is disturbing to you, you'll want to turn off the podcast now. And if you love deep dives into ancient myths and mysteries of the world, hit that follow button, subscribe, so you never miss an episode. All right, so this is a little bit different of an episode here on Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. My wife is not with us, but instead I have Isaiah here.
Hello.
Hello, Isaiah. So, let's see, some of the things to plow through here real quick. All of the Bible verses, at least that I'm going to be using, are going to be from Bible Gateway's English Standard Version, and I will be using Strong's Interlinear Concordance, or at least interlinear concordances from BibleHub.com. I also have another introduction to make here. We have, I've been pestering this gentleman to join us on the show for quite some time, is a good friend of mine and Isaiah's, Levi.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself, however in-depth you want to get so that total strangers can know who you are.
Sure. Okay, so my name's Levi. I'm currently studying the Bible out at Rosedale Bible College in Ohio. I'm interested in robotics, general automation, logic, the Socratic method, and musings on the Mythical Matrix.
Heck yeah, I love it. You dropped your last name. That's a bold move there. Now everyone knows who you are. They're going to find you and start stalking you. All right, now if you're good with it, I'm good with it. So let's see. This, Isaiah, forever ago, I think it was like episode 28 or so, we did that ad and talked about the Socratic Circle, consulting your local Socratic Circle. This is very much our local Socratic Circle. This is us three. Would you agree with that?
I would say,
we're the Socratic Circle here. All right. Isaiah, is there anything that you wanted to add from that last episode we did with Karen? Some final thoughts that maybe you flushed out over the last 20 minutes or so?
Listen to it if you haven't already.
Yeah, definitely listen to that one.
You don't know that you don't yet know you don't know.
Yeah, you were saying that there's a as your circle of knowledge expands, so does your circumference of ignorance, basically. More or less, you were kind of saying that without saying it.
Yep.
Psych Fact. I'll try to do a Psych Fact. Most people have brains. There you go. Most people do.
Not all of them.
Not all of them. I joke here. All right. So in this episode here, we're gonna go back to our old template. Do some nice chapters for you listeners. Shouldn't be as tangential. It'll be a little tangential, but we're gonna do episode overview. So first things first. Let's see. We're gonna talk about the secret war of the Bible and its beginning, And then we're going to talk about the forgotten flood connection. We're going to talk about the Tower of Babel. We're going to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah's hidden sin. We're going to talk about the 12 spies sent out. We're going to talk about fluffy animals, the Amalekite Dilemma, and then cultural and historical context for the subject of genocide, since it's an issue that's a strong issue for a lot of Christians to face. So we'll also be hitting some Socratic counterpoints, try to blending those two words together. Good grief. That's why we have our local Socratic circle gathered here today, is to dive deep into all of this. And then we'll hit summary and recap of the key points we've discussed, and then the conclusion. So what we're talking about today is we're talking about that biblical genocide issue. And I want to approach this from a Christian perspective, but also a logical perspective. And I want to take this from an angle I've never heard another Christian take it from before. And we do have some content out there already taking it from this angle a little bit. So I will say that, but we have a lot of very harsh verses in the Bible when we read them at first glance. We have Deuteronomy 7:2 that talks about destroying a people group totally, that you're not to give them a treaty, you're not to give them mercy, nothing. 1 Samuel 15, God orders the Israelites to not just wipe out a people group, but animals of a tribe. And I think an interesting contact. I cannot talk tonight. It's rough. I don't know. I think an interesting contrast to that is Jonah 4:11, where we see that God seems to care about both the animals and the people of Nineveh, which was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And I ran this by my dad, who has a PhD in history, and I'm like, I know the Assyrians are pretty brutal. Would it be accurate to say they were one of the most brutal people groups in history? And he said, yes, absolutely. So, it's not just coming from me and my knowledge of history. That was, verified by a historian. So, we have some things that seem kind of contradictory here at a quick glance. So, it seems like God is kind of fickle almost, where he wants certain peoples to be destroyed and that others to be saved to very extreme measures that his prophet didn't even want to do it. And it begs the question, is God really this fickle? Is it a contradiction? Are we talking about different deities? Or is there something deeper at play that we've maybe just missed in our readings of the Bible? And so that's where I want to go today. So we're going to start off by talking about the secret war and where the secret war begins. And it begins in Genesis 3. Genesis 3:15, reading from, again, the ESV here, says, I will put enmity between you and the woman. This is God speaking to the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Between your offspring and her offspring, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, there's a lot of theological implications. I'm sure Levi's mind is already spinning on this one here. But I want to ask you, how would you interpret this verse from your theological studies?
Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't gone quite as deep as I'd like to, and I certainly plan on going further as far as this thing. But when I hear the offspring of the devil, or Satan in this case, the serpent, which most would interpret as the devil, I do. I guess my first thought is the offspring of the devil would be like the ways in which he breeds hedonism, and he just breeds sin. So my mind wouldn't immediately jump to something carnal, something physical, or like in genes as far as, corrupting humanity or anything of that sort. But I would at first consider just his offspring being the forces of evil, the forces of sin.
Yes, and that's the classic understanding we see taught in most churches, is that, it's you're children of your father, the devil, as Jesus says in, I believe it's John 8 or 9. So certainly there is room for that interpretation here. But I think it's interesting that we see that the serpent's seed, offspring, is contrasted to the woman's seed or offspring, where, then, later on here in Genesis 6, we see it's the sons of God come down to the daughters of men instead of and that's kind of the understanding of that from a lot of Christian spheres that question the literal genetic context there, is that daughters of men were just those that gave themselves over to hedonism and gluttony. And so it kind of seems like almost a contradiction when we're reading this in just a metaphorical, symbolic sense. But what would you both have to add on that?
Well, offspring, for the woman, clearly it's natural, right? And I was just looking, it says, he shall bruise your head. would that be referred to it? Would that be referring to Jesus? Is that generally what's understood?
Yeah, the proto-evangelion, I think, is what they call
Okay.
that verse,
Like,
generally.
It
But-
says he and not they, as if it's Jesus, like one.
Right.
And that's physical.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like, as far as theologians have understood it for a while, basically the earliest introduction of Jesus and Jesus' work.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's a fair way to interpret it. But I think that there's something deeper going on here. I think that there's something potentially genetic that's being spoken of. Something. I want to be careful with words here because semantics matter. We were talking about this before we started. Semantics matter. Your word choice matters. But I think something tangible, maybe not something necessarily physical in the same way we would see our physical bodies, but I think that there's something tangible. And we kind of talked about this a little bit on our last episode with Karen as well. She kind of had alluded to this. But I think we do see a theme of like bloodlines being a key component to a lot of major conflict here. And the Hebrew word here is zarah, which is the same word used for offspring for both the woman and the serpent. So it's kind of weird if it's using talking about like a woman's like offspring in terms of like your descendants, the descendants of mankind, are going to be put to contrast with the descendants of the serpent, the descendants of evil, those that practice evil. Why is the descendants of mankind being equated to as being almost good here, in a sense? That doesn't make so much sense to me from a theological perspective when we see scattered throughout Scripture later on this analysis that your fleshly sin or desires are sinful. It seems to kind of go against that archetype almost. Is that what I'm saying makes sense to you? Because you're giving me the look of the college.
I think a little bit. No,
Okay.
no. I'd have to explore that a little bit more as far as the logic goes. But I think I could be persuaded to understand that in some way.
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of deeper stuff here, and we're going to dig into this some more.
Do you think there could be multiple layers to it? Like it could mean multiple things at once, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see a precedent. I'm sure you know about this. There's multiple layers to prophecy in Scripture, and that's kind of what's more understood. So there's certainly room to consider that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very possible there's multiple meanings here.
Levi, you had said that this is generally thought to be Jesus.
Yeah,
the he
right,
it refers
right.
to.
The proto-evangelion.
Yeah, and then I guess in that viewpoint, what would they say? What would they say it's referring to when it says, when the bruising of the head, he shall bruise your head? Is that on the cross? Is there a specific event?
I think that's generally his resurrection specifically. And then the striking of the heel of Eve's offspring is whenever Christ is killed
Okay.
on the cross, right? So he's damaged, but his head isn't crushed. Like, basically, Satan is dealt the more severe blow.
Yeah. So I guess I'm thinking if we focus in around that interpretation, would the offspring of, is it Satan or is it the serpent? I guess it's maybe both at the same time.
Yeah,
It says
so
serpent,
that's the
right?
general
So maybe the
understanding.
offspring of the serpent in that case would be, I guess, those who killed Jesus. Although maybe that's more broad. Maybe it's all who sinned.
Or what pushed them to kill Jesus, you know? Because, like, the ones who killed Jesus were the Jews, which are also the people who he died for and he was there to serve,
Yeah.
you know?
So there is a lot of theological implication here when you guys are right, but I do hold to the belief that this is talking about something more tangible and almost carnal as well. Mm-hmm. And so that begs the question, why would a spiritual war involve something as physical bloodlines? Why would they use, the word choice here that does seem to, and I'll do some cross references here as you guys are sharing your thoughts. But why would it choose something like offspring and seem to be equating it into the same kind of like physical context if there was all this metaphor and solely metaphor built into it?
Well, I don't know if I'd say it is solely metaphor, considering that, like, Jesus was very much carnal.
Right.
And he very much was offspring. He was fully human, fully divine. And so, yeah, with that understanding, I would still say, obviously, it's quite metaphorical. And I think a word like what it chooses to use as offspring fits fairly well within that concept.
Yeah, and so this word, I'm using Bible Hub to do interlinear analysis real quick here.
Love the Bible Hub.
It's used consistently across Scripture to reference offspring and descendants very consistently.
Right.
So there really is a precedent for that deeper
So
dimension to it as well.
It seems like we're pretty sure offspring refers to people or a person. Like Jesus, the offspring of the woman was Jesus. Sounds like the offspring of the serpent, it's multiple. It's not singular like Jesus. Right. And some group of people, maybe those who crucified Jesus, I guess the question is, in what way are they the offspring? Is it, like, how specific is it? Is it through the genetics, or is it some broad term?
And this is the question we are dedicated to answering here on Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix. We are going to take a brief pause, and we're going to tackle this question a bit further. And we will be right back. And we have returned here on Musings and Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix to answer the questions that are plaguing your mind as our dedicated listeners. So we're going to transition here, unless either of you gentlemen have another point that you wanted to add in to our first part there. Nope, I'm seeing some head shakes. Okay, cool. We are going to transition into next part, which is the Forgotten Flood connection. And I feel like Genesis 6 is one of the most misunderstood sections of the Bible, specifically the first about 9-10 verses of it. So I'm going to read Genesis 6, 1 and 2, and then verse 4. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, and the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, they took wives as they chose. And the Nephilim, verse 4, were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So these Nephilim, they're big warriors, but are they something more? There seems to be some hidden missing piece that we often overlook when we are analyzing this stuff. So Levi, question for you is how is this verse often understood in Christian spheres?
So I haven't heard a whole lot of discussion on this. I have definitely heard the explanation that the Nephilim were formed, half human, half divine, or not necessarily the good version of divine, but, extraterrestrial or something of that sort. I've probably clung to that general understanding for quite some time now. And, I'm curious to explore that more.
Yeah. Isaiah, I think you already kind of know which directions I'm going with this. Did you have anything you wanted to interject?
Not at the moment.
There was one question I wanted to have. Sons of God, that word, is that tied specifically to, like, Yahweh or Adonai or any of that, or is that sort of just like divine being, son of a divine being? I'm thinking it probably would be, because
it's a variation of Elohim.
Okay,
yeah.
right. Which applies to basically any being that isn't strictly physical, like we would say we are.
Yeah, is it? Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Elohim? It's like could refer to God or plurality of. It might we might translate it into gods, but it would be like lowercase g gods,
right.
Or it could also be God. Right. Uppercase.
I think it can even be angels and demons, and yeah, I believe that's right. I think I watched a Bible Project video concerning that.
Sweet.
It sounds cool.
Done some early research. I love it.
Short plug for Bible Project. They do some amazing stuff.
Yeah, okay, so this was what I thought. I just didn't want to say it and be wrong. Mm-hmm. It's Bene Elohim, Ha Elohim, Bene Elohim more specifically. So it's a like sons of the divine, sons of God.
Right.
And the usage of Elohim does get a little hazy as to whether it's referring to a false god, an angelic being, a council of beings even, or the Almighty himself when we look at it from a biblical perspective. And so it does get a little difficult to decipher. So now you bring up a great point there. For those of you that listen to our Genesis 6, the Deconstructing the Floods Part 1 and 2, you're familiar with this breakdown. Excuse me. But for those of you that are just tuning in, this is a fantastic recap to hit it all. But as I told you earlier, because we were talking about this, what really sold me, I didn't realize how blatant it was, but In Genesis 6:9, this is what really sold me on the genetic manipulation that was going on here, and something physical. That Noah was blameless in his generation. It's tamim, which is used regularly in Leviticus to describe an animal that doesn't have genetic defect. Like if you pop this open on BibleHub.com and you scroll through like the tamim usage in Strong's Interlinear Concordance, it's like verse after verse you see in Leviticus where it's referring to getting a lamb without blemish, without genetic defect, and it's constantly a variation of this word.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that sets a big stage for us when we're looking at all of this. And then shifting to Genesis 6:12, it says that God saw the earth and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. So it doesn't say Hadam or, like the man or mankind. It talks about all flesh. So this seems to indicate that there was something more than just sin going on here, that it was actually a corruption of genetic corruption of not just man, but animals too.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this says to me when it's emphasizing that all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts? Or should I just drop the mic there and end the episode?
No, I think that's pretty logical, really. I would think maybe even it's probably a combination of both. Because it seems, you could argue, like, every time we see the presence of what is presented as the Nephilim in the Bible, it comes along with extreme sin, pure fornication, child sacrifice, basically everything you don't want to see. So maybe this has like a dual meaning in some sense.
Yeah, I think maybe it's kind of like the pinnacle of corruption, almost.
Mm-hmm.
Like that eventually you get to a point where you're so corrupt that you just kind of lead into this, like mixing your DNA with fallen angels. Maybe that's kind of like the pinnacle of all of the corruption itself.
So then would you think the daughters of man would have had to have been like pre-corrupted before they ever would have,
originally uncorrupted beings that then became corrupted because of their intermingling with the divine in ways that are forbidden by the Bible.
Would they have to have been pre-corrupted before they would have?
I think there would have been corruption in a moral sense, sure, but I don't know about the same carnal sense that we're talking.
No. That's what I'm thinking too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it was already after the fall, so sin had entered the world.
Right? Exactly, because we're in Genesis 6.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the descendants of Adam, way down the line. So yeah, no, we're on the same page, I think. So then this means that the flood, again, we've hashed this out on the show before. If you want to hear a deeper breakdown, go check out those episodes early on in the M-Quad annals of history. But that means the flood wasn't just about a wickedness then and just in doing sin. It was a divine reset to get rid of corrupted genetics, which adds a huge dimension to everything, that we're normally taught in churches, and that the churches then, a lot of churches get this wrong. So, mic drop moment. I'll let you guys chime in. Any other contentions?
That's super fascinating. A big thought, like the fact that the flood may have destroyed just about every life because they were genetically corrupted. For me, it's hard to believe that they would have all been corrupted genetically except for Noah and his family. I mean, you've got, he singles out Noah, right? And uses that word that you're saying often has a connection to.
Yeah,
like
it's a
clean or pure or, and then, but on the ark, Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives all go. So were they all clean? Surely they had to be, right? And if, say, his nieces were good, were their siblings not?
Yeah, so it says Noah was blameless in his generation. So the way I read that is that basically anyone that was allowed on the ark was because of their genetic, the preservation of the original genetic DNA that God had created. And that the flood was about wiping out this fallen angel corrupted DNA, that it was irredeemable.
Yeah. I guess with what I was saying there, I'm kind of pushing back a little bit. I think, I agree with what you're saying. I think it's something to think about. For me, I'm just wondering how far it went. Like how, surely there were more than just Noah and his immediate family that were uncorrupted, it seems.
It doesn't seem that way from when we read the text that it emphasizes so much that Noah was blameless in his generation.
But then others were allowed to go with him. Like his nieces would not have been probably related to him very closely.
His immediate family, his 3 sons and their wives would have been genetically pure, but that would have been basically it at that point. That's my understanding and reading of the text.
If that is the case, why do we see after the flood, some hints back to Genesis 6 and
You're
some of
spoiling
that
it.
sort of thing. Dang it.
Don't worry, we're going there.
Okay,
I got
okay,
you. I got
okay,
you, brother.
okay.
Wow, that got real quiet. Hold up. I got a cricket sound in here somewhere. Where is it? Isaiah's thinking.
Yeah,
It's just loading
I had a
screen.
thought.
We went from like really loud to everyone's just like, yeah, I don't know what to do now. All right. So what we're going to do is we'll transition into talking about the Tower of Babel a little bit, and then we're going to take another ad break. So Tower of Babel, what was it really? I have a very unique perspective on this, and I think you'll appreciate this. I don't think that when we look at Genesis 11, it was a tower. I think some of it was just rebellion against God for being dispersed across the earth, because we do see precedent for that in the text. But I think that it's deeper than that. I think it's an attempt to reach the divine again and to try to get back to that Genesis 6 world already.
But not physically by building a tower, is what you're
By
suggesting.
building a tower to maybe try to breach the spiritual through physical means.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. So that adds an interesting dimension here to consider, I think. And, again, we've talked about this previously on the show. So for our listeners, if you want a deeper dive, our Genesis 4, 5, 10, and 11 episodes went into this a bit more. But I think we have to be open to these alternative interpretations as well, because I do think it fits. And we're going to continue along here. I'm going to hit a couple more points. We'll hit a Socratic challenge or two, and then we are going to follow this further on in the post-flood. What do you got, Isaiah?
The thought came back to me, and I did a little bit of research. I was thinking, well, didn't Noah preach to those around him or try to get them to join him and be saved? I looked it up. It looks like there's no verse referring to that in Genesis. However, 1 Peter 3:20 says, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. So it says God's patience waited. I'm wondering. I know. This is pushing back a little bit.
No, it's not. It's not
I do
at all.
think there's validity to what you're saying. I mean, with the Nephilim corrupted, the angels reproducing with mankind, like there's clearly something going on here. And I think the flood was used to reset things. But that's just a little bit of evidence pointing to maybe the potential for some to be saved other than Noah and the 8 that did make it.
Are you saying saved in the physical sense that they survived the flood? Okay.
I don't think you're pushing up against me at all, actually. I think that you're actually, what you just laid out actually is going to affirm what we get to part 4. But no, we're doing Socratic method in this episode, Isaiah. So don't apologize for trying to challenge my ideas. I love it.
I guess I think it does, counter your view a little bit, or maybe we're just diving into the nuance of it. But if God's waiting, and if the people are destroyed because of genetic impurity, how can patience fix that? How can God wait for their genes to become pure?
Let's transition here into the next part, because what you're saying sets me up perfectly for what we're about to dive into next.
Fantastic.
So we will address this in just a moment. Stay tuned. lot of deep musings going on here behind the scenes while the song was going on for so long. Isaiah is having some very deep epiphanies that I think we'll circle back to at the end of at the episode here.
Epiphanied.
What's up?
I've been epiphanied.
You've been epiphanied. You've received all of the epiphanies.
You've existed in epiphany for all your time, Isaiah.
All right, so we're gonna shift gears here, Isaiah, and I think this will maybe shed some more light on what you just talked about God bearing, having patience in the time of Noah.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna talk about Sodom and Gomorrah and their hidden sin. So for those who aren't familiar with Sodom and Gomorrah, fire and brimstone destroys the city. The usual explanation, Levi, is sexual immorality, right?
Mm-hmm. Not only, but
yeah, but
that's a large
there's
portion.
A key portion is that they were very sexually immoral, so God wipes them off the face of the planet. Jude, actually, in verse 6 and 7, compares Sodom's sin to Genesis 6 in a loose connection there. And so it indicates that there's some Nephilim-like corruption that could tentatively be going on. There's indication that in Genesis 14, the giants were already possibly in the region because we see the Rephites mentioned, and I believe they are later then mentioned in the conquest of Canaan when the Israelites come back and specifically equated as being giants, and that they're often understood to be Nephilim. So all of this to say, let's connect your idea here, Isaiah, because I loved where you were going there. It was something to challenge it, but I think this actually adds a new dimension. Before Genesis 19, we see Genesis 18, where Abraham barters with God to spare Sodom and Gomorrah. So let's follow the story here a little bit, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Mm-hmm. So God says that he's going to destroy the city, and Abraham basically does a back and forth and is like, well, would you spare it for 100 righteous people? Yeah. Or I forget the exact number he starts with, but eventually he gets God down to like, hey, would you spare it for 10 righteous people? And God says, yes, I would. And 10 is an interesting number there. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Levi. It is 10, is it not?
I don't remember specifically.
I think it's...
I think. Does it matter for your point?
It does. One of you fact check me, because then how many people were on the ark? It's 8. It's 8. It's not 10. 2. Well, Noah and his wife, and then 3 sons and 3 wives.
You're thinking if it had been 10, he may have spared.
That may have been what was holding off the flood. Basically, was the purity. I feel like that's
kind of loose, but I like it. That's an interesting connection.
It's God's patience was him waiting for that ratio of the original genetic purity. And I hate to use the word genetic purity because there's bad context and connotations to that with like Nazism and all of that. But like they hadn't been corrupted by evil fallen angel
by
genetics.
Non-human. They were all descended from Adam and Eve.
Right. So then let's follow this because you're saying the connection's loose. I think this is going to tighten it up for you a bit. Genesis 19, and I'm going to be a little explicit here. So if you have little ears listening, this is definitely a time to tune them out. Genesis 19, what happens? The angels, Levi, he's trying to take off his headset like, all right, I'm out. Genesis 19, what happens? The angels go in to get Lot and his family out, right? And what do the men of Sodom then want to do? They want to rape the angels. And what does Lot say? He says, no, take my daughters. Don't do this wicked thing, which sounds horrible, first off. Like that's pretty horrible. But I think it gets missed that what the deeper thing was here is it's the Genesis 6 sin. And he was trying to stave that off and saying, hey, better rather than let them sink into this corruption, it's better they just take my daughters.
Like you think there was some way in which even the people of Sodom realized that these were angelic beings and not just normal men.
I think that they specifically knew that, and that's why they wanted to take them. It wasn't sexual immorality. It was Genesis 6 sexual immorality. They were trying to get back to that era, and that's why God said, okay, you have sunk into this level of being this corrupt. I am not going to be patient any longer because you no longer have that righteousness, that blameless, that redeemable like aspect to you. So therefore, I'm going to wipe you out. And that's why we see the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
It's interesting because this is kind of going the opposite direction, right? It's man trying to initiate with the angels. Like the angels weren't there to do that.
Initially, Genesis 6, the angels come down and take who they please. But these men were so corrupt, they were trying to take the angels. And so it judges that perversion specifically harsh.
You're saying, while these men in Sodom weren't offspring of angels, they were in the fallen state of mind where they were pursuing that.
They were pursuing. I mean, I think
Maybe
there
both.
is room to argue both, certainly, because
yeah.
we see the Rephites and others are specifically identified as Nephilim, as we're going to continue on here. So it's possible that they already had some vague connections from some weaker fallen beings, and they were seeking that out to a higher level. But it could have just been they were going after that level of corruption, and if God allowed that to continue, they would have attained it, and that's why God put a stop to it.
He's just cutting it off before
Right.
it reaches its
Because
end.
you see, like with the Greeks were so homosexuality is a sin that's attributed to the Sodom and Gomorrah as being a reason that they're judged, and I think this gives a deeper explanation. I don't think it was homosexuality alone, because we see a lot of cultures like the Greeks embrace homosexuality, and there's no harsh judgment for them solely on that sin from the divine. If you look at this from a Christian perspective and you're accepting, the God of the Bible as true and not just like a regional deity or something made up. If we come in with that presupposition that God is indeed real for our non-believing listeners, he judges this Sodom and Gomorrah so harshly, but not other cultures that supposedly have the same sin, unless we've misunderstood the sin that's at play here.
It is pretty brutal what happens to Sodom and Gomorrah, and I think it's mentioned quite a bit. Like you said, Jude, right? It mentions it
yeah.
there.
Like
Yeah.
it was a remembered event,
It's
just
iconic,
because of how brutal
like
it was.
archetype.
It's
event.
supposed to be the
Or
modern day Dead Sea as well.
Yeah,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
the
It's-
salt,
It's
right?
still salty.
Yeah, still salty. It's so salty you float when you get in.
Yeah. People drown because of that,
Oh yeah,
Like
because
they get on their face
I
and you
drowned
can't
because
flip over.
I floated too much.
That's terrible,
That's a-
really.
that's a
Now you
tough
know.
Imagine being so salty you go that way. Anyway. All right. So unless you gentlemen have anything you want to add, that's why you read that, Isaiah, about the patience of God, and I'm like, it's the patience of how many
That's
righteous remain.
Specifically with Sodom and Gomorrah, a major event relating to God's destruction.
Yeah. And that Genesis 18 and 19 explains Genesis 6. And that explains that verse in Peter that you just read. And so it all starts to connect. We'll dig into it a little deeper at the end of the episode, because I know you had some more you were talking about.
You said
but
to fact check you, it was 10.
it was 10?
Yeah.
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 It
Okay.
started at 50, and then
Yeah. Oh, it was 50. at
Abraham
first. Thank you.
negotiated down to 10.
Yeah. But
Pretty
I think
impressive.
I think that's the that's kind of the cutoff there, which you see less than 10, and that's where the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah comes. Less than 10, like original humans remain. The DNA has been so corrupted by irredeemable fallen beings that then judgment comes. And then the same thing with the flood, where how many do we have? It's 8.
You may
Where's-
have already.
Where's the music coming from? Oh, that was you. Okay, I was like, I'm not playing music on the soundboard. We're not going to a break yet.
I think you probably already mentioned it, but if you could refresh me. Okay, so with your interpretation, what was God waiting for? The verse in Peter, referring back to when Noah was building the ark. What are you saying God was waiting for there?
Yeah, so if memory serves, what was Methuselah? I think God waited until Methuselah died, or it was
Okay.
someone right after died. And so if we look at that and we consider that context, we are down to a very limited number of people. I think that, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Levi, but I think it was like God specifically waited for Methuselah or one of Noah's ancestors to die, and then that's when God was like, we're gonna.
Unfortunately, I can't correct
okay.
you on that. That wouldn't
I
surprise
think I
me,
see
though.
what you're saying. You're saying God was waiting till it became so few, and then he ended it.
Yeah, so his patience was enduring that, hey, there's still a couple, there's still 15 people left. So even though
not gonna kill-
I'm not going to kill everyone because of these 15, but then it gets down to a certain level and he's like, okay, there's only 8 left. If I don't intervene now, the corruption's going to be so severe that my plan for redemption through Jesus Christ is gone. So
You're saying
I
he
gotta
waited
act.
as long as he could.
What
Yes.
what would have been the point of that waiting, though? Say there was only 15 righteous people. I mean, I don't think the ark was quite full with 8 people. What would have stopped him from tossing another 7 people on and, going about their merry way and letting all corruption, cease?
Great question. I think it's the principle of preservation. Jesus equates us to being the salt of the earth and the light of the earth. And I think there's a certain ratio of righteous people present that God staves off his judgment for the sake of those righteous people. And at a certain point, once you pass that ratio, God's like, okay, I have to judge and I'm going to make a way out for those of you that have,
Stayed true.
have stayed true. And again, we're looking at it through this more genetic sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that's kind of the opposite of the way I first looked at Peter, where it seems like maybe God's waiting for things to recover a certain amount, but you're saying he's waiting till it gets so bad, and then he goes ahead with
to give them a chance to recover, to say, hey, maybe he knows, of course, but to
Okay.
say, hey, I'm going to give the people the chance to fix this themselves. And they didn't. And
But
he's like,
if you're
okay,
saying
you-
it's a genetic problem, how would they?
Like that
fix
there'd be
that.
enough people that are of like those pure genetics of, again, I hate saying pure genetics because it sounds very elitist, but it's about those, because like the idea here is that if you're corrupted as a Nephilim, you are an irredeemable being because you're corrupted by a fallen angel that has knowledge of perfect truth. And so there is no redemption at that point. At least that's kind of the understanding that we're approaching this from here. So we have to consider it from that perspective. That's the context I'm phrasing everything in here. Don't take me out of context. But that there's that maybe that, hey, this genetic line is corrupted with evil, like, because there's no better way to put it, but this genetic line is corrupted with evil. Maybe there's like, maybe these people will band together that don't have that and do away with that line and save it. And that God is giving those people the chance to do that.
Yeah.
So that would be my thoughts. Let's shift over to talking about the 12 spies, and then we'll take another ad break. Does that sound good to you, gentlemen?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Yep.
Is this thought-provoking enough for you, Levi?
It's very interesting indeed.
Good. Glad we can keep your attention.
Thoughts
there.
have been provoked.
All right. So we are going to talk about the 12 spies. This is the only other time we see the word Nephilim used in the Bible, actually, is when it's talking about, I think it's Numbers 13, when they come back, the 10 spies come back and they have a bad report, and Joshua and Caleb come back and they're like, yeah, things look bad, but God is greater. We can do this. And they refer to the Anakim. We seem like grasshoppers to them. And there's an understanding of equating them to Nephilim. So who are they fighting? The Anakim, direct descendants of the Nephilim. The Rephaim are also phrased in the same context as being giants with the Anakim. So the assumption is we can equate them to Nephilim. And then a specific Og of Bashan is also equated as a giant who is a Rephaim. He had a 13-foot long bed according to Deuteronomy 3:11. So we start to look at all of this when we actually follow the story of the Bible in context. It's not a war against humans. It's a war against this fallen genetic corruption of evil that's within mankind's DNA. Thoughts?
So you said descended from Nephilim. Do we know that for sure, those groups that you mentioned?
So
their name seems to...
Yeah, so we only see the word Nephilim one other time used in the Old Testament, and it's... memory serves, it's referencing directly to the Anakim in Numbers 13. And then the Rephaim are equated directly along with the Anakim as being giants.
Okay.
And then Og of Bashan, who is a Rephaim, is equated to being 13 feet long approximately, depending on how you want to define, I think, cubit or whatever.
And don't they say he has a helmet that weighs like 75 pounds or something too?
Probably.
In similar verses, I think it does.
Either him or Goliath, or
Right.
both maybe.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
So-
Well, and it also references one of Goliath's ancestors who is understood to be a descendant of the giants, right?
Right, yes.
I don't remember who that was specifically.
You're going a little deeper
So-
than I've researched at this point. So, but yes, no, I think you're on the right track
Okay.
for sure.
Okay, so these are the descendants of the Nephilim. Which Nephilim? This is post-flood, right? Nephilim
Yeah.
in Genesis 3 is pre-flood. Okay, so the angels came down and reproduced with the humans, and we're assuming that's the Nephilim, the descendants of that. And then you're saying we got Nephilim here after the flood. Where'd they come from? Because the whole thing we were just discussing was that the Nephilim were destroyed in the flood. They're back, though.
And this is a great question because then we have to ask what the fallen angels are. And if we consider that, the fallen angels likely wouldn't have been wiped out in the flood because they're angels, they
Yep.
could very easily just come back. And we see a lot of attempts and allusions to this post-flood with things like the Epic of Gilgamesh alluding to his father being part spirit, which we talked about with Karen, and she kind of elaborated her perspective on, which was definitely very enlightening. And we see a lot of this... these ideas of, for lack of a better word, sex-crazed demigods in mythology with Zeus and Enlil and all these other deities where they have a hyper focus on this. And I think it's just a post-flood return. But that they were more careful about it, these fallen angels, because they saw how harsh God's judgment was if they got too big.
So you're saying in being careful, they limited it? Like
Yeah,
it
that they
was
limited
less?
themselves. Because, I mean, if we kind of jump the gun here a little bit and go over to our conversation with Karen on the last episode, we're begged with the question of, is this still happening today? Would we recognize it? And we're jumping the gun here a bit towards the end, but I
mean,
it begs the question of, is this stuff still going on today? And are we just defining it under different terms, but it's the same thing that's been going on for thousands of years?
The implications are pretty large with this. My
It's
mind
profound.
immediately goes to, well, what if, if they keep reproducing, I'm guessing, all the descendants from the first ones, it's going to be things have become convoluted. It's in a way impure. It's not fully human.
Yeah.
If this takes over the population, what happens? Like, is that happening? It's hard to believe that it would happen a few times and not grow extremely widespread. Because, the further we go, as people marry different groups, there's intermarrying, our genes are all kind of mixing together. So I'm thinking if there was very much of these fallen angel offspring, if there was very many at all, it'd pretty quickly start to spread to a large amount of the global population.
Statistically speaking, before long, just about every human being in existence would be contaminated, essentially.
Yeah, or at least a large group.
Right. So then we have two things. Number one is, okay, so God very clearly, very harshly judges this. So if it had gotten to that point, we probably would have already seen God's judgment to contain it. And that's probably why we see these quote unquote genocides in the Old Testament. It's because it's not genocide, it's wiping out fallen angel corruption that's affecting mankind. But then the other way to look at this too is to wonder, hey, maybe after if the corruption isn't very blatant and if it's more gentle, maybe after a certain succession, a certain amount of time, a certain amount of breeding, those genetics get lost or something like that. And this is very speculative. I admit it. It's very fringe, very speculative. I don't have a concrete answer on this. I'm just presenting what the logical train of thought I've managed to pick out over Scripture over the last couple months, because I think this adds a whole new dimension that we have to consider from a Christian perspective that just doesn't get talked about. And this is definitely not a means to go out and try to execute justice on your own as a Christian or not, in any way, shape, or form, because every single time something like this happens, it's directly sanctioned by God, whatever the judgment on the Nephilim is. So this is not, I would say this is not something for man to decide. This is something where God specifically decides on this judgment. But let's take another pause, and we will return in a moment to talk about fluffy animals. And were they really fluffy, or were they something much darker? And we've returned here on Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix to blow your mind with a perspective on Genesis 6, Sodom and Gomorrah, biblical genocide in ways that you might not ever have truly thought about or speculated on. So, let's talk about the fluffy animals here. The fluffy animals. All flesh was corrupted in Genesis 6:12. If the humans are altered, why couldn't the animals be altered?
Why would the animals be altered?
Messing around with genetics, as Karen talked with us in the previous episode, there is clear, again, you have to decide for yourself if you want to believe her story or not. But if you do take it to be true, you are then faced with the idea that there is manipulation of all sorts of genetics going on. So when God says that he wants the animals to be wiped out, this starts to indicate that it wasn't just the humans that were altered, but it was the animals that were altered as well. And I think this adds a deeper dimension. So let's jump forward to the book of Matthew, or the Gospels in general. Jesus casts out the legion demon, I believe. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on this because you're more probably up on your New Testament than I am.
Probably not. You can only learn so much in a year.
And they argue with Jesus, and they ask to be cast into something. They ask to be cast into the pigs.
Mm-hmm. That is correct.
And then they drive the pigs off the cliff, and
into
the
the
pigs all, drown. But why the pigs? Because I would argue it's because they had familiarity with possessing animals before. And if we come at it from the demons of the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim running around, this adds a whole new perspective and meaning to like the idea that, animals are corrupted. And we see this all throughout mythology with the Minotaurs, centaurs, fawns. We keep going, like the Sphinx, like all of these different things. Like you have to ask, are these spiritual entities or is there something more to them?
Even some of the Elohim that are described in the Bible are like the combinations of multiple animals that we see naturally occurring here on Earth. So that's also something to consider, something else to turn into them. Yeah, right. Or their appearance.
Maybe
they might not even be carnal.
I wonder if they are older than the animals they look like. We're used to the physical animals. Right. It's like, they were made to look like these. I think our animals were made after them.
Yeah, well,
I think there's a difference between breeding for specific selective traits that are already present within the the genetic coding versus the idea of like mixing with fallen angel DNA too. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we have to be sure to keep those distinct and separate.
Well, if you use the image of Jesus casting the demons out into the pigs as an argument for the corruption of DNA, you would also have to say that Mary, who had the demon, would have been corrupted.
Well, no, not necessarily, because what demons are is, I believe, disembodied spirits of Nephilim. So they're seeking a host body.
Okay.
And Jesus alludes to this when he talks about how they wander a desert place. Why would a fallen angel need a body? It doesn't really make sense to me. If they already have like a body of their own, like as Paul talks about in I think 1 Corinthians 16, that the spirituals do have a type of body that they are equipped with. Why would fallen angels need to inhabit a human body? It doesn't make sense unless we're talking about a spirit that's not allowed to go into Sheol or to heaven or to hell or however you want to quantify it, but that is an unregistered spirit of an evil fallen Nephilim. And so this really puts into context what these beings are that we're talking about, where it's not just, it's nice little children and these nice people and these nice animals. They're what we would quantify as demonic spirits. Now, this is the genetic impurity that was wiped out. So no, I don't think it means that Mary was so much genetically impure, but it was more that these unclean spirits, from these unclean beings then came in and possessed. Right. But so I'm not saying that the pigs were like Nephilim, like resulting from the Nephilim. I'm not saying that because I know some people would go off onto that extreme. I don't buy so much into that. I think it's just more that the demons have a familiar. This is to illustrate the point that the demons, the Nephilim spirits, have a familiarity with animals and possessing animals.
Okay.
And to say that, hey, there could have been genetic corruption going on with fallen angels.
I see where you're going with that more.
So you're saying there's not Nephilim swine,
but like centaurs? No, like seriously.
Yeah. How did the centaurs? Are they like the bull and the
centaurs? So like Narnia, like the human half, and then the horse like rest.
Is it horse?
That would be so disturbing.
So how did that happen? Like, are we positing that there is a possibility those things could have existed through?
It's possible.
Just the fact that they exist in so much myth makes it.
Where'd the idea come from? That's a weird idea. Mm-hmm. I don't think I would have ever come up. I mean, you could.
I don't know, Isaiah. You come up with some pretty interesting things.
I was like, okay, maybe I could have, but I don't know. Back to a question I had just a couple minutes ago.
Yeah.
They asked to be cast into the pigs.
Yes.
So, okay, Jesus is going to cast them out, obviously. Why don't they just go and then enter the pigs? Did they need permission from Jesus to be in the pigs?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so, yeah. They have to have a certain level of permission to engage in that level.
How can permission be granted to enter animals, usually? Would it have to be through some spiritual practice, or some human would probably have to open the animals up to this demonic possession?
Possibly, and we see a certain aspect of permission given within the occult for occult activity to happen. But I'm not sure, and I don't think for my point to be true, I have to have an answer on that specific
Yeah,
nuance. But it's a fair question to ask, like for sure. I'm
just
not
trying to
downplaying
explore
it.
the different different corners of this.
Yeah,
idea.
no, it's the Socratic method. We got to play with the idea and consider, like as you both have thrown ideas out that potentially could have totally derailed my my train of thought here. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, of course.
Yeah, it's not derailed, but I think there's 2 trains now.
Yeah.
There's trains everywhere. I got a whole network up in here.
Yeah.
The trains are both dead and alive until we observe.
Schrodinger's trains.
Schrodinger's tracks.
Oh, man. All right. Let's hit the Amalekite Dilemma here, because I think this is another good one that I actually brought this idea up to a atheist/agnostic, and he countered with this. And I thought this was a fair point, and I wanted to talk about it, because now we're jumping forward a bit, where it's not just the conquest of Canaan now. It is Saul is king, so we progress out of the Judges era from the Old Testament. And again, in 1 Samuel, God orders for the killing of men, women, children, and animals. And so we have this here again. There's a fair challenge to this, that the Amalekites are not specifically described as being giants. So this is a possible counter to the Nephilim are the reason that quote unquote genocide is approved in the Bible. And so this is a point to explore.
Are you saying we have no connection between, is it the Amalekites?
Yeah,
and
not
Nephilim?
Necessarily. So I'm going to expand on this a little bit.
Except the fact that they had a similar profile of sin.
Right. And so we have to ask, what was the original sin of the Amalekites then that God is judging them for? Because 1 Samuel 15 addresses that, hey, I'm going to destroy the Amalekites because of their previous sin. So what they did is in Exodus 17, they existed back then, and they attacked Israel from behind when they were defenseless, and they are repeatedly attacking up until 1 Samuel. And so that's where God is ordering for them to be wiped out. So I don't think that the absence of declaring them specifically as giants negates that there could be giants. And I don't want to argue from ignorance here, but if we look at the cultural context about how all of these different Canaanite tribes like Sodom and Gomorrah, and then the the Rephaim and the Anakim, all of these others are becoming corrupted with Nephilim DNA, that demonic DNA. It can't be out of the question for the Amalekites to have the same thing. Like, why wouldn't God just order for the Amalekites to be wiped out when they were attacking the Israelites in Exodus 17? God waits until a certain point. It's that same pattern that we see with Sodom and Gomorrah and the flood. So I think that the argument can still hold, but there are other possible reasons to consider here. I think that the Amalekites were also very corrupt people, as I'm sure you know. You hinted at child sacrifice. Worshipping Molech involved laying children, babies, on a burning altar and sacrificing them that way. Right. And there is strong evidence to indicate that the Amalekites were partaking in this act, from my understanding of history. And God also knew, I would say, that they would keep doing what they're doing and keep attacking Israel if left unchecked. There's actually... I'll wait to reveal that one. But yeah, no, I mean, either way, they were corrupt, or at the very least in the process of maybe corrupting their bloodline. Where there does seem to be this very harsh switch where it's like, okay, wipe them out. Because again, let's look at the bold contrast to Nineveh here that I brought up in the beginning. So Jonah 4:11, God basically lays out almost a lament to Jonah, saying that hey, there are people that don't know their left hand from their right hand in this city. And there's also all these animals in there. I don't want to destroy them all. And you're reading that, you're like, what the heck am I reading? At 1 Samuel 15, God has no problem with that. Why does he care in Jonah 4:11? So I think this adds a whole different lens that we have to look at. There has to be something else, going on here. That the Amalekites clearly have a corruption to them, a severe corruption, more severe than the Assyrians, who are one of the most brutal people in ancient history, as proposed by most modern historians. Some even theorize that the reason Jonah was so reluctant to take the message of salvation to them was because they had attacked Israel at one point, and that maybe Jonah's family was directly affected. And maybe that they killed some of Jonah's family or something. And that's speculative, but that adds a whole nother dimension to why Jonah is so reluctant. But if we consider that the Assyrians, from my understanding, were like skinning people alive and doing very, very horrific things. And God is willing to say, hey, they don't know their right from their left. They don't know what they're doing. The same way Jesus says on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He is showing them grace and mercy here. But it's a grace and mercy that's not sent to the Amalekites. So there has to be something different. There's a very different context here if we're talking about the same being, because context always matters. One last thought I'll add to this here, because I see you both with your Bible, so we'll take a short pause here in just a moment to give you some time to collect yourselves a little bit and to collect some good counters. But traditionally, I think my understanding is that there is believed by the Jewish people to be a direct connection between Haman's bloodline in the book of Esther and the Amalekites. That Haman is believed, I don't know if it's explicitly stated or not in Scripture, but it's at the very least, the idea is present that that Haman was a descendant of the Amalekites and Saul's failure to completely wipe them out. And that's why Haman appears, and we have the whole book of Esther, and we have all this extra unnecessary death. So, I mean, this begs a great moral question I want to leave you both with.
In Esther, the Jews killed their enemies at the end, right?
Yes, but there was conflict, so certainly Jews died as well. The Jews were granted the right to defend themselves.
Esther also plays into this particularly interestingly because of Haman. Haman is said to be a descendant of Agag, who is,
Is it
the king.
Agag?
Agag.
Oh, so it does
No,
explicitly...
you're right. It's 2 A's. Yeah, Agag.
Okay.
It does explicitly state it then.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not
I
speculative.
was searching up Amalekites, and often, Agag or Agag, whatever, he's often,
Agag.
he was the king. Is that what you're saying? I see
Yeah.
he's
Well,
often,
in Samuel 15, he was the king
okay.
of
Yeah.
the Amalekites. And I think it's Esther 3.
Okay.
Yep. Haman, the Agagite, or however you say that.
So we have to put these discussions of genocide in context here. Is it really genocide, or is there something much deeper going on? And I think it's something much deeper and darker than what is taught in most churches. But I want to leave you both with this one thought as we go out to take a break here. Is it immoral to go back in time to kill baby Hitler if you have perfect knowledge of what his actions will lead to? But no, seriously, this question, we have to play with this and entertain this, because with perfect knowledge, from an all-knowing being, knowing what everything could be, we look at things on a very finite scale, but God looks on that broader scale to say, hey, if all these people are wiped out, this staves off all these different genocides that are going to happen down the road that lead to more death. So especially if you approach this from a utilitarian perspective, who's to say that the greater good isn't favored by God's actions in saying, hey, wipe these people out?
I think the idea of time travel kind of breaks a lot of things. I think when that gets brought up, like if we're going to travel back in time and change things, that means the present is kind of a lie. It makes everything feel a little bit unreal.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's very relieving that only God has the ability to see the future.
Yes.
But
How
I will
these
say,
things work
a
out.
timeless question.
It is a timeless question. Would you go back in time and kill baby Thanos? Asking the deep questions no one else will ask here on Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix with Isaiah and Levi, to be the Socratic circle of reason for me, to keep me from derailing myself. And I think you've tried to shoot off some other trains here and there, but I think we've kept the line of logic going for the most part. Would you gentlemen agree?
Yeah.
I'd say we've kept it within reasonability,
Yeah.
possibility.
So I think at this point, we need to shift over to talking about cultural context for what happened in ancient times when other cultures were invaded and things like that. Because I think we've laid out. I think I've laid out a very convincing argument that, you know, if you look at it from the Christian perspective, and if there was corrupted DNA, again, I'm not promoting this superior genetics idea. I'm not saying that at all. But what it is it's like you literally have to think about it as it is, where this quote unquote corrupted DNA is a demon with flesh. That's what it is. This is what God is wiping out. It's not some innocent child. It is a literal demon that just has a body. And God is saying enough. And that is what's happening here, where it's not this ethnic cleansing that some atheists want to try to make this out to be, but it's God saying, no, I don't want these demon spirits are going to exist, but they don't need to have bodies, and so I'm putting a stop to this. But if we set all of this aside, because I want to talk about some broader historical context to the issue of genocide here. It's only up until recent times that like the Geneva Convention and all this stuff has existed. Ancient warfare, and warfare in general is brutal, but ancient warfare was incredibly brutal. Like this is a very clear theme if you go and analyze history itself. There's lots of brutality. So I mean, if you invade a culture, if you fight off a culture that wants to lay war to you, you really only have like two options. It's subjugate the people group or exterminate the people group. Like they're really, can you guys think of any other good options? Like if you have a nation that wants to invade you, and we're in an ancient time where the Geneva Convention and all the laws and everything we like to rely on, you know, nowadays, the UN, all of that doesn't exist. Your two options is like, if you have a nation that repeatedly just keeps attacking you, you can subjugate them, conquer them, make them your servants, or you can exterminate them. Everybody.
If you partially take over, the remnant are gonna always hate you, and
exactly
rebuild
unless you can rationalize and resolve the problem,
right? Come to peaceful terms,
right?
Yes.
Which is not particularly common in.
But at that point, it's not
historically
war, right?
Right. We hope it isn't.
Yes. So, I mean, I think it's, you know, you basically have conquered servants or mass extermination, and the conquered servants harbor ill will against you for the duration of your reign, as we see with the Haman, who I just thought that was speculation, but apparently that's direct scripture, that he's a descendant of the Amalekites. It's a very, very, very deep consideration. We also have to consider that these people that we're talking about, again, they're not innocent people minding their own business. The archaeological finds of worship of Molech shows that they were doing child sacrifice, you know, laying their infants onto burning altars. I also think it's ironic that people want to condemn atheists, agnostics want to condemn biblical warfare and make it seem as though it's not justifiable. But that like things like Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and the fire bombings of Dresden, which resulted in tons of civilian deaths, are acceptable and overlooked in arguments. And so I think that we have to put into context that war is just brutal, and sometimes there is civilian loss of life. And the idea of a repulsion, I'm not saying it's good, it's bad, but it's just the way warfare is sometimes, that if you're going to firebomb a city, there's going to be civilian casualties.
Yeah. I think some of the problems that seem to crop up looking at the Old Testament and some of these commands God makes, I think we could look at it all from maybe three different perspectives. I mean, one, what the atheists would hold to is that God isn't real. You know, he's a creation of man. Of course, there's contradictions because, you know, the writers in the Old Testament were writing one thing and there's the New Testament's different. Like, it's just, there's fallacies because it's man-made. And then I guess the next view, which I'm not sure anyone holds, is that there is a God and he did command that, and there's contradictions. Like what he said there really doesn't line up. They seem to be contradictions. That's what the atheists are saying. It's like your God's contradicting himself.
Right,
so,
and that's one way to look at it, yes.
But I guess what we would be looking for is that, okay, God did command this, but he is consistent. There aren't contradictions. He had a reason. We have to look for the reason. So, yeah, I guess I'm just kind of restating what's already kind of understood but unspoken. But if we can just simplify it, like, the argument is, well, this God must be man-made because these seem to be contradictions. But I think if we open up to the possibility of some good reasons, I mean, there's a lot we don't know. This happened a long time ago.
And I think if we approach it from that atheistic perspective, I understand their arguments against this, and I can respect it, because if God is a man-made construction, and that man is using God to quote unquote order ethnic cleansing, if just for the sense of, I just want this people group wiped out, just because, even
justifying
though, even though they do some mild evil things, but God said to do it, let's do it. This is morally apprehensible, but at the same time, if we approach it from that perspective of, hey, maybe God has a deeper reason and meaning here that he's put in the Bible that we've missed, and we have. I am convinced in my mind this is the reason, because how else do we resolve Jonah 4:11 with Deuteronomy 7:12 and 1 Samuel 15? They are two different polar opposites. And unless you want to try to make Yahweh out to be like a fickle, like mind-switching god of like the polytheistic Mesopotamian deities, the only option you're left with is either just saying he's a man-made invention, or that he's this divine figure that he saw all of this, and he's been trying to preserve humanity's genetics, not in a ethnic cleansing, your superior sense, but hey, I don't want human demons running, like literal demons with flesh running around. Like, I don't want that. That is an abomination.
But they weren't demons, right? They would be the offspring of the fallen angels.
Well, right.
And I guess what is the spirit? It's not fully human. It's not an angel. It's a mix.
Right, but we are getting speculative here, because again, there are a lot of theologians that would disagree that demons are disembodied spirits of Nephilim,
Right.
and we are assuming that in our discussion, and that's why I'm saying demons with flesh, because I hate saying ethnic cleansing and genetic purity and all this, trying to make them sound like it's like we're genetic superior. I'm putting in context how evil these beings are.
Yeah, I guess I'm just with demons. I would see that as being maybe the spirits of the Nephilim, but after they've left the Nephilim. But I guess you can kind of work backwards and say, well, this is when the demons had the bodies.
Yes.
But I feel like the negative connotation, the negative part of what we think of as demons, I feel like that comes after they had those bodies. Like, were they all evil when they were in their bodies originally?
I think absolutely. That's the requirement here. I think for God to have such a drastic reaction to not wipe out people like the Ninevites and the Assyrians, like same people group, but like to not wipe them out despite their extremely depraved behavior, there had to be something worse going on.
I mean, they repented.
They did eventually repent, because didn't God basically promise to bring judgment to Nineveh if they hadn't changed?
Yeah.
Yep. But they did change, and the difference here would be that the Amalekites never came to repentance.
They were never really given a chance to repent because they were so corrupted. The Amalekites, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Nephilim, all of them.
There wasn't a prophet that we know that prophesied to them and said, hey, you have to repent. But, I mean, time itself is an opportunity to repent, and it is an opportunity to change who you are and your behavior.
Yeah, I probably should have started this conversation off a little bit better about what the Nephilim were. Maybe we should let's take another break here, and then we're gonna come back. I'm gonna talk about the Nephilim a little bit more, and kind of explain a little bit what it fully means to be Nephilim from a philosophical sense in what the Bible presents, and then we'll hit some final Socratic thoughts, and then close out the episode if that's good with you, gentlemen.
Yep.
Sweet. We will be right back. we are, Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix, the final segment of hour 15 going on here. Well, hopefully the final segment, we shall see. But let's see, I did want to hit a little bit more about the Nephilim because I feel like I've not fully explained what it means from a philosophical sense to be Nephilim. And I probably should have led with this because I can foresee people taking me out of context very easily here. Context matters. Listen to the whole episode. Think about what I'm saying. If you're just going to take what I say out of context, then you're not doing the conversation justice. But let's talk about the Nephilim here. The Nephilim are the offspring of fallen angels that have perfect knowledge and that are irredeemable from biblical principles. That there's no redemption for fallen angels themselves and humans. So what does this mean for the offspring? It means an offspring that there is no chance for redemption. Isn't like Jesus himself on the cross is like, hey, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. Mm-hmm. There is a certain level where we don't have perfect knowledge as humans. Right. And you see this taught in, I think it's like Romans 7 or something as well. The perfect has not yet come. We don't have perfect knowledge. But that these Nephilim, they were literally demons with bodies, their original bodies. And that God, that they are so perverted and polluted by evil and perfect knowledge that there is no redemption for them. And that's what these entities are that we're talking about.
Could you define perfect knowledge? Because I haven't heard this concept really presented in this way, unless somehow it ties back to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
I think it does tie back to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where there's a deception aspect to Adam and Eve, right? So let's tie it back to the garden. Okay. Adam and Eve, when they sinned, there is a deception aspect. There is a rebellion aspect, but there's also that deception aspect where they are deceived by the serpent, and the serpent kind of plays them along where they wouldn't have done it of their own volition. And so there's an indication that the spiritual, like the serpent in the garden, has a more perfect knowledge of things to be able to lie about it and to tell them, oh, you're going to be like God.
Which was true in some sense.
Yes, and it's true, but it's a twisting and conflating of concepts. It's disingenuous.
It's deception, right? He is presented as the deceiver.
Yes, it's true, and that's the thing, is best lies have some truth in them. So there is a clear representation of perfect knowledge that the angels have, being different entities. That, if you want to come at this from like a perspective of Genesis 1, the angels would have been maybe created day one as light, and they got separated the light from the darkness. And maybe this even symbolizes some type of rebellion in the heavens that happened at this point, where there was a separation of the fallen angels and the good angels.
Well, yeah.
Is the sun up for 2/3 of the day? Is it light out for about 2/3?
It depends on the time of the year and your location.
Yeah,
it's probably usually a little less than that.
But I'm just thinking because you're saying 2/3
of the angels. Of the angels fell, and Satan outnumbered 2-1. If he separated the day from the night and 2-1?
Where do we get that? That's in one of the prophets, right? We think it's analogous to the fall.
It's Isaiah, I think.
Lucifer, Morningstar.
The book of Isaiah, not our guest here. But that Satan took a third of someone took a third of the stars with him, and we've talked about that on episode 43 with, I think it's stars. We talked about that with Anzu in episode 28 with Satan in the Bible, which there's not as much about Satan in the Bible as a lot of people think. A lot of understandings of Satan is from Dante's Inferno and modern interpretations of a faun with that's red with a pitchfork and horns, and anyway,
so true.
But yeah, no, I think it's important to define Nephilim. These are not just they're like us. No, they're completely irredeemable fallen beings from a Christian perspective, and so then that puts it in a very different perspective.
Do we know they're irredeemable?
I mean, that's the principle that's understood because there's no redemption for angels. I think there might be some verse where Peter or Paul talks about that, where there's no salvation for angels. So I'm leaning on that principle as well.
Angels,
they have a human parent and an angel parent.
Well, but yeah, that's the understanding, is that there's no redemption for these Nephilim. Otherwise, the judgment wouldn't be so harsh.
Well, there's redemption not for angels who have fallen.
Right, but for humans, and humans only, because of the deception.
The descendants of the fallen angel be redeemed, even though the fallen angel isn't able to be redeemed.
But that's the understanding, is no, if we put it in that context where that these demons have these demons are the descendants of the angels and they have that same perfect knowledge, then no, there is no redemption for them. They are just automatically pure evil because they are born out of pure evil instead of that human nature of given the choice of good versus evil.
A barrel of wine with a little bit of sewage is sewage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or, yeah,
that's a good way. That's a good way to look at it.
Ice cream with a little bit of sewage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm getting a mint. Sorry. I thought I could do that a lot quieter. Like, yeah, I want my mouth to feel a little more fresh. But yes, no. So I think at this point, I've rambled for a good hour. You gentlemen have interjected some fine thoughts. Thank you for the listeners for sitting in this far. What are your Socratic challenges or other thoughts that you have in general that you want to interject? Because I've pretty much wrapped up my discussion other than just some random tangents I want to hit.
Well, I mean, I was looking at Nephilim. I think it's connected to the word giant. I think it's often associated with, I think it's plural and masculine and often referring to like giants. And Goliath is described as being, I think, 9'9". I don't know what the population was then, far less than today. With genetic variance, you'd expect the tallest people today to be taller than that, or at least you'd have a lot. But it sounds like there was multiple that were Goliath's height or close to that height. It's just a little piece of evidence that if there was someone who existed that tall, it's not natural. That shouldn't have happened, especially with today people being on average taller. We've got 8 billion people. We don't have a single person that's as tall as Goliath when there were multiple that tall then.
And if you are that tall, you tend to have genetic deformities. Like the tallest person.
And Goliath was a warrior.
Yeah, the tallest person I think was like 8 or 9 feet or something like that we have. But he had to walk with a cane. His joints had all sorts of issues where it was unnatural for him to get to that height.
I looked it up. He was close to 9 feet, still 9 inches or more shorter than Goliath.
Oh, okay.
And the tallest today, I think, is under 8.5 feet. And we've got 8 billion people.
Yeah.
Something was going on, unless we're unless cubit doesn't mean what we think, or the number 9 doesn't mean what we think. But if that translation is correct, and that was correctly recorded that there was someone that tall, that's evidence for something going on. Very, very unusual.
Right.
Yeah. Levi, what do you got? Because I've dropped a lot of a very, very deep, unique perspective on how to read the Bible here. So what are your thoughts? What are your takeaways?
I guess just one of my main final thoughts is, we're here seeking to understand what God was doing at this time, and what his intentions were. We believe ultimately God is infallible, and everything he does is right, whether we see it or not. So whether you accept any the ideas that have been presented or not, we can rest assured that our God is good, and what he has done will be committed to his further glory.
I think that's great. I think there's this idea that a lot of atheists would put forward that if you accept God without some sort of proof or extreme tangible evidence, there's something wrong with that. I mean, first of all, wrong according to who or what? They don't have a standard of right and wrong, but I would say there's nothing wrong with that. You can choose to believe in God and see where it leads you. If we are just naturalistic beings that are going to die in 70 years, what do you have to lose? Who's going to stop you?
Everybody brings their own presuppositions into everything they do.
We choose to believe something. So there's not anyone who's thinking, oh, I can't believe in God until I get evidence. Who told you? Try it. See what happens.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like that can become a dangerous path because then you can end up believing anything, whether it's true or not.
You still take reason with you, but there's some things that can be understood best after you've put yourself in the place of believing something else. I know it does sound dangerous.
And it is best to understand that you cannot live your life on the very basis of reason.
Yes.
You can't prove
that I agree.
You can't prove every morning that you've actually woken up.
If you say, okay, I'm not going to believe in God, that's dangerous. I don't want to become some radical who's doing who knows what. Well, trying to stay neutral is also dangerous. There is no neutral. You're going to slide down some slope. You can't say, oh, the God of the Bible, I don't want to fall prey to that. I'm going to be neutral and reasonable. That doesn't work out well.
I mean, I would disagree in a sense, circling back to what you said, Isaiah, about like you don't need to have reasons and you can just believe, try it. I think you have to approach it with skepticism and reason and logic, but there is a certain point where logic ends and faith begins. Because I mean, even if you want to approach it from an atheistic perspective, we've talked about this on the show, abiogenesis, quantum origins of the universe, they have slews of assumptions. And if you want to go hear more about that, episode 14 is one, and I think episode 17 was another, where I talk about a whole slew of presuppositions that exist in the standard model that you can't really prove. And at a certain point, you just have to decide, what am I going to have faith in? Am I going to have faith in scientific methodology, making assumptions about things millions and billions of years ago when forensic science can't even get accurate, like who committed a crime within like the last year or two? Or am I going to trust this certain text in the historical methodology? At a certain point, science and observation ends, like Socratic method, logic, speculation, and faith begin.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether you
could
want to
even
call it that or not.
Or you could even say it starts with faith. Like everybody bases everything they perceive. Everybody understands their world through a worldview that has, pre-understandings or presuppositions.
There's so much to work with, so many things you can look at. There's a lot of evidence for Jesus. There's a lot of evidence that life was created, designed. We don't know how we got here. As for like the first simple cells, and you reason isn't something that can be followed in itself.
No.
You follow something and then you use reason to try to decide. But yeah, like you said, we're not saying you just jump to believe in Christianity with no reason. But I would say, okay, if someone who doesn't believe in God, they're thinking about this or listening to what we're saying, they're like, I don't want to jump to conclusions without reason. I think you do have reasons, but if you think that it is unreasonable, like, okay, where are you at? You're going to believe something. You're going to get up tomorrow and do something. What are your reasons for that? How good are they? Are you going to treat everything with that level of skepticism? To be fair, you should, but I don't think you can go anywhere if you have that level of
it's like
hesitancy.
Cliff Netchell called someone out on social media on this, actually, where they were like, they validate every single thing. And he's like, oh, really? Do you check to make sure that they put the right ingredients in the food that you get at the store?
They're treating
and everything?
God completely
Cliff
differently than everything else.
Or Connectal,
Yeah, but no, it's a fair comparison. You have to approach it with skepticism and reason, but you also have to be fair in the standard you apply. At a certain point, there is just a point where observation and verification and what our senses can perceive end, and something else has to begin. And I on the show here, like I'm a Christian. I'm not going to hide my faith. That is where the truth has led me, and it's not been an easy journey. I've walked away from my faith several times in pursuit of the truth, but I've ultimately come back to it. I'm not going to fault anyone for believing something else. You as the listeners, you all know this. We've talked about this from the beginning. Believe what you want to believe. I'm not going to tell you have to be a Christian. That's the conclusion I've come to, and I'm just laying out the truth, and you're joining me on this journey of truth. But no, I would agree that Christ is the way, and I think that there is just a certain point where you have to decide, what's enough evidence for you and what do you quantify as acceptable evidence, because there can sometimes be double standards and bias in how we quantify that.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
Anything else that you wanted next? I know you had something from 1 Peter we had talked about circling back to, or did you want to just forgo that?
I think we kind of went over it.
Okay. Last couple things I wanted to hit here is, this was an interesting one I saw in the news, is that there was a confessional, I think, in a Catholic church where they did a ChatGPT 4.0 model, and they put in like the Gospels and like the biblical teachings and created an AI Jesus platform that you could confess to. What are your thoughts on that, gentlemen?
Man. Well,
I think if the Spirit's real, if the Holy Spirit's real and is what we believe it to be, it's perfect. Why would we seek a digital alternative?
Aren't based
by
off
doing
of
that,
our limited information.
Yeah, by
in
doing
the
that,
Gospels.
aren't we kind of acknowledging that we think we can improve on the Holy Spirit? Not that there's not a room for technology. I like ChatGPT.
And to understand that whole ideology, you have to accept the Catholic understanding of having confession.
Yes,
to a
of
priest
course.
specifically.
The Bible mentions confession, but not to a computer.
well, yeah, right. Or even specifically to a priest, as far as the Protestant understanding goes.
One to another, right?
The majority of it. Right.
Your brothers.
Any
in Christ.
brother, I think, is at least my understanding of it.
Not to a Nephilim.
No,
Nope, not to a
That's
Nephilim.
not a brother, maybe.
But yeah, no, I wanted to drop that because I saw that and I'm like, man, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to get your guys' thoughts on that.
That's a little disturbing.
AI is taking over.
I'm guessing that is not an Orthodox Catholic church. That's
Probably.
probably a sideliner.
But maybe
you know what I
2060
mean?
it will be.
Yeah.
Will be Orthodox, and you'll have to update your subscription to get the newest confessional software.
Oh no.
You need to update your subscription to
Confessions.
$20.99 a month
a
to be able
pop-up
to
shows
interact
up.
with
Your
you.
confessions are no longer valid as of September 14th.
Man, this sounds like what is it?
Indulgences.
Thank you, indulgences. Yeah, with Martin Luther, we're coming full circle here.
Oh, man.
Catholic Church is back on, and anyway. But I think kind of to wrap everything up here and to start moving into the summary here in just a minute, I think no matter how you want to split the hairs, I think that the more you study mythology, whether you want to look at what the biblical perspective is or the Mesopotamian whatever else that we're going to get into down the road. I think it's undeniable that the ancients are at least claiming that something was within the heavens and was and or is coming down and breeding with humans, and that there does seem to be some sort of justice or apprehension or strike against this in some cultures. And I think that this is undeniable, whether you look at Mesopotamian mythology, whether you're looking at the biblical, whether you're looking at like Norse or Greek, or however you want to break it down. I think that you are faced with this idea that there is something there. Now, what you want to do with that, whether you want to believe that premise or reject it, that's up to your discretion. But yeah,
you could deny it all and say it's nothing, but how sure are you? It's
Yeah.
your choice. You do have the freedom.
Yeah,
We're presenting some information. Take
and
it however you will.
And are you being consistent in the criteria you use to deny that you would use to accept or deny other things, like that you were taught in school about science?
Yeah.
And these are the deep questions we have to ask, because not only is like our purpose on earth at stake if we get this wrong, but depending on which belief system is right, our eternity could be at stake with this as well.
Was there a French philosopher that had that? You got two choices. If I choose one, there's no potential loss. If I choose the other, there's I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, Lewis uses that argument as well, I think.
There was one before him too, though. I'm
It's
trying to remember.
it's
who
got
it
a
was.
famous name. It wasn't Descartes, was it?
I think it might have been, actually.
But-
I think it was Descartes.
Yeah.
It's like the divine wager, or the great wager is what it's called.
Something. Yeah.
I think, therefore, I am. It's a great argument.
That-
All right, but let's.
One thing I want to add, if our listeners are wanting to find ways to dive into this more and really, discuss these things and come up with answers or questions, I think they too should start a Socratic triangle.
Yeah, Isaiah was picking on me in the in the interlude here, saying that we're not a Socratic circle because there's only three of us, because it's a Socratic triangle. But then I challenge you, Isaiah. You must geometrically prove through the fourth dimension that it is a Socratic triangle and not a Socratic circle.
It's a fourth dimensional triangle. We don't have fourth dimensional proofs,
no.
do we? I'm going to have to come up with some sort of Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah. It is Pascal's wager, by the way.
Pascal's
that we were
wager. There
discussing.
we
It was
go.
Blaise Pascal. Yes.
Okay. Was he a
The
mathematician?
scientist. I think it was a mathematician,
Yeah.
a scientist. He did some stuff with like pressure and understanding how atoms exist together.
Okay, so let's head into summary recap here. We'll recap everything we've kind of gone over for the listeners, because I know we hit a lot and it's deep, and I don't fault you at all.
Some of the stuff we hit back.
I just rattled off a whole train of thought that probably just blew both of your minds on how to read and see scripture. Maybe. I don't know. Levi's just like, yeah, you're full of it. Just
No,
get out of here.
I found it interesting.
Yeah,
for
that's
sure.
good.
Yeah,
That's
I don't know if it
Not
fully
that I
blew
accept
my
it all.
mind, but I think there may be a few air leaks I'll have to patch up.
There goes his
There's a
mind.
few more.
Okay. We got another one. All right, summary. So key takeaways here is that we're looking at it. The conquest wasn't about genocide. It wasn't about ethnic cleansing. It was about removing literal demonic entities with human form. Those demons that you see in like paranormal movies that are attacking people, those entities with bodies is what we're talking about here. And it's about eliminating those from being able to have physical action. So we're talking about entities like thousands of times worse than Hitler here. We're not talking...
Yeah, the idea is it was done out of love for the
Or
others.
was one of the entities in Hitler.
But yeah, so no, that
Well, we
brings,
should maybe
yeah,
do a podcast about that.
that would be an interesting one. So then Sodom's destruction's linked directly to the Nephilim-like corruption and the Sodom and Gomorrahites seeking that out. Indications, can lead us to a conclusion that the Amalekites, and we see in 1 Samuel 15, that they were genetically compromised. And you made a good point as well, that they were incredibly spiritually and morally corrupt as well in a lot of their actions. And so even if this argument doesn't hold, that it's not out of the question to say, hey, maybe we should wipe these people out because they're so immoral. I mean, like, what else would you do if there's like serial killer living next door killing people all the time? It's like at a certain point you're gonna have to go, if you don't have the cops, like you're gonna have to go deal with that, or you risk them killing you.
Right. Like God is ultimately able to bring judgment. He spares some to live a long life, to to come to understanding and to come to grips with things. But the truth is, he can choose to judge when he wants to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like people want to approach it from that utilitarian perspective of goodness and be like, oh, well, maybe it's for the greater good that they live longer. But it's like, well, who are you to say that? You don't have perfect knowledge.
Right.
Like God,
Exactly.
God is all knowing by definition. So if he exists, therefore he would have the right to execute such a judgment.
Right.
The animals, they were corrupted too, and that's why, like, we see God saying that there's cattle and all these things in Nineveh in Jonah 4:11, and he's like, I don't want to wipe out, like, there's people that don't know right from wrong, and there's these animals, I don't want to wipe them out. It explains this contrast that we see with God.
And he says, there's not a sparrow that falls without him noticing.
That he even clothes the lilies of the field in more glory than Solomon was in all of his splendor. Yeah, it's absolutely.
How much more will he clothe you?
Exactly. Yes. Another consideration we have to keep in mind is historical context. Ancient warfare is just brutal. It's not unique to the Bible. In fact, warfare itself was brutal up until recent times. You look at the firebombing of Dresden and the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and you look at all this, and at a certain point, it's like innocents do just sometimes, like, as much as it sucks, innocents sometimes do get killed in war. Now, were these people we're reading about in the Old Testament innocent? It doesn't seem like it. But that's ultimately for you to decide and come to your conclusions as the listener. I've laid out, I feel like, a very consistent argument with Scripture. But that's ultimately for you as a listener to decide if you believe or don't believe. But yeah, so I mean, I kind of already jumped the gun on this question. But if all of this is true, what if history is repeating itself as we see with Karen? Would we even really recognize that this corruption is starting to happen again? Maybe we wouldn't. Maybe that's this whole thing with these alien abductions, is it's starting to happen and become more prominent again.
I mean, if we learned anything from history, it's that people don't notice far more obvious things happening to their societies.
Those that forget the past are doomed to repeat it.
In the society, it's like you're not looking at it from the outside. You don't have the contrast.
Yeah.
Like if you're moving with the airplane, you don't see the airplane moving.
Yeah.
That's a nice analogy.
Yeah. Those that forget the past are doomed to repeat it. And this is something that I think has been forgotten and covered up since St. Augustine of Hippo. I don't like that guy. Got rid of this line of thought. And his whole reasoning in his letter, more or less, from my reading, boiled down to, I don't think that angels could reproduce, therefore they didn't, therefore it's talking about something else. And it's like, man, tell me you have confirmation bias. Jeez. All right, whatever. But gentlemen, any final thoughts that you all want to interject here?
It's been real.
It's been fun, but has it been real fun?
I think it's been real fun.
All right, it's good.
I've had fun.
Not boring you out of your mind.
Not whatsoever.
Good.
I've been musing, and I will be musing for a little while longer.
Yeah. Hey, send an email to m.quad.musings@gmail.com if you want to see more of Levi on the show, because I've been pestering him to get on the show for forever, and he finally came on. So if you want to see more of him, let him know. I will pester him. I will send him your emails so that we can get him on the show.
Hear more of him.
Yeah.
If you want to see more of him, we need to video this.
Yeah, that is true.
Levi's hair is ready for that.
Oh, and I will blip out your name. So
yes,
the
thank you.
listeners aren't hearing your last
I
name.
am only Levi.
Yes, you
To
are.
all of you.
You are only Levi. Yes. Trying to find something here. Hang on. Isaiah, say something smart.
There
we go. Levi.
I really let you down there. Something smart.
Something smart.
Universal mathematics. That's what I'm going to use to come up with a fourth dimensional Socratic triangle.
All right, I'll hold you.
I'll hold
That's
you to it. That's what I was
it.
referring to.
Okay, I will hold you to it. You were speaking in the fourth dimension. You had to translate it back to the third dimension. That's what was going on, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
The verbal dimension.
Yeah. All right. We're on the same track here. We're good.
I'm on 3 tracks.
Man, the train just keeps splitting to more and more. All right. So that being said, let's wrap up the show here. If you're listening on YouTube, drop a comment below. Was this divine justice, genocide, something else? What are your thoughts? What's your take? Be sure to check out our previous deep dives into Mesopotamian mythology, where we have similar mind-blowing episodes, that pop up from time to time. Stay tuned for more deep dives into Mesopotamian mythology and myths that people believe in the Bible. We'll be diving into Enoch and a series of other mind-bending mythology. What's up?
Quandaries.
I like it. There we go. All right. Hey, be sure to share the podcast with someone. If you made it this far, clearly you are a dedicated listener. Take some time and you know someone that would be interested in our show, let them know that we exist and help us build our listener base a little bit. Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link will be in the show notes. If you do a donation of 25 or more, you will get mentioned as a producer in the upcoming show. We do ask that you consider that, as that helps us keep the lights on here, fund the research, as I do put a lot of effort and time into exploring mythology and recording these episodes and everything. So definitely would help to keep the show going if you were able to assist, but no pressure, of course. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at m.quad.musings, Facebook at Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix. Isaiah's playing with the microphone there. I'm going to mute you both. You can email us m.quad.musings@gmail.com. We invite you to send us your confessions, concessions, contentions, snide remarks, whatever you like about the show, whatever you don't like about the show. Just, I will warn you, do not send me your logical fallacies. You will likely get ridiculed. It will leave you anonymous, but you'll get ridiculed on the show if you send in a logical fallacy. So, whether you've been listening on the earth with the mortals, in the stars of heaven with Enoch and the cherubim, or down in the depths of Sheol, we thank you for quantumly transcending time to join us on this epic, ancient biblical discovery that we've journeyed on, a forgotten aspect of the history of the Bible itself that the church has forgotten. And we hope you have a good rest of your night.